OutKick's Bobby Burack. It's great to see you, man. I'm excited to talk to you today. I'm not going to pretend like we are strangers. I know you fairly well, Bobby, and I've always appreciated your work, and I will share this story with the audience at the outset of our conversation. Sometime within, I would say, the first year of joining ESPN, I started getting these direct messages on Twitter. I believe they were direct messages. I started getting these messages. Hey, man, can I interview you? Hey, I'm student at, I don't remember where you went to school, Bobby, and hell, you might have been in high school, but I'm a student at X school. I'd love to interview you. And to be honest, I ignored it. I ghosted you. I didn't say anything because you get a lot of these types of things from time to time. But you kept coming and you kept coming and you sent me more messages. And then you'd say, hey, I've interviewed this person or that person. I've interviewed Jamel Hill or Kevin Nagandi. I'd love to interview you as well, Will. And after a while, maybe 6 months of this, I was sitting at my little cubicle at ESPN and I thought, man, this kid is persistent and resilient and he doesn't quit. And if for no other reason, Will, you need to reward that characteristic. You need to give this dude an interview. And here you are, we're probably looking at, 7 to 8 years later. And look, you're one of the premier, most independent columnists in the country working for OutKick. And you have, from this little town in Michigan where you live, made yourself a career. And now you're what, like 23, 24?
Little older than that, 26, but no, I appreciate it. I mean, that's a pretty accurate breakdown. So yeah, when I was in college, I always knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know how to get there. So I just said, I'm not going to follow anybody's lead. I'm just going to do it. So I just started a podcast with a guy you might know pretty well, Patrick Hatton, who's working behind the scenes with you right now. And I just did this podcast, and I reached out to people, and there were certain people I wanted to interview, and I didn't care what their political affiliation was or what their views were. I just wanted to interview everybody. You mentioned Jamel Hill, who I interviewed early on, and I wanted to interview you. And a lot of people did get back to me pretty quickly. Some said no, some said yes, and I was always fascinated by you for really a lot of reasons, but mostly is that there's not a lot of people in media, Will, who come from a background similar to me, which is a really small town background. I graduated with 26 people.
Yeah.
My friend, I always hear people say, we're going out with this group of friends. I mean, a group of friends would be like my math class, right? Like it was such there was no big groups. So most people in media are born in LA or New York or grew up rich or went to Ivy League schools. I had none of that. That wasn't my background. So I knew you from your radio show and TV, talked about growing up in Sherman, Texas. And I always say geographical location really shapes a person. And a lot of your views, I always thought tied back to where you were born. And that's where I think really formed me. A lot of my opinions come from Peck, Michigan, growing up with just a few friends in my life, a really small town where everyone knew everybody. So that's why I was always interested in your career. And now here we are, 7 years later, we've gotten to know each other. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on what you just described. So first of all, I think it's important for the audience. They know this, that I highly value the quality of persistence and resilience. I think it's probably the biggest differentiator between failure and success, more so than intellect and more so than talent. And so you exhibited that early on, just your willingness to continue to hear no or nothing until you got the yes. And I'd like to think that's part of my career as well. Because like you, I'd never asked for a job, really. I just sort of made my own jobs. I promised myself I wouldn't ever address recent criticism of me and my meritocratic rise in my career. But I would say the only thing that made me who I am in my career is my just willingness to make it happen. It was nothing that would have ever shown up on a resume. It was only something that was shown up in character. And you showed that same quality. Here's something though I was thinking about when you were talking. I was once on Dan Lebatard's podcast, Bobby, and he asked me, and Dan and I didn't know each other well. We met a handful of times at ESPN, and there was like this arm's length distance relationship. I think not on my behalf, but maybe on theirs. Will can kind of come on and he'll joke because they knew I would not take myself too seriously. But we're never going to talk seriously with Will. We're not going to entertain his points of view until I eventually did his podcast. And in that, the idea of that conversation is let's go deeper. And one of the questions he asked me, Bobby, is like, tell me about your dad or tell me about where you came from. And what he was asking me was, why are you the way you are? And I rejected that premise. Like, I did go on to explain to him, like, I have my points of view because I earned my points of view. Like, I've thought through the issues. Most people say they can laugh and say, "Well, you overthink things." You know, I mean, I think a lot and about what I believe, and I didn't get these ideas handed to me as like a birthright. But it is still true, and I would have to say this to Dan, and I think it's accurate what you said. Where you're from is part of who you are, and you can never truly leave it behind. And so where I'm from and where you're from does help paint and color the way I see the world.
Yeah, and the biggest case I can make is most people in media exist because they just want to fit in. They just want to be like everybody else. They want to get nice text message and retweets and shares and be a part of the cool kid club. See, growing up where I did, I always got accustomed to only having or caring about the opinions of very few people. Again, I graduated with 26 people. I mean, if I were to go hang out, it'd be with one or two friends. So I never really concerned myself with my mass reputation. I cared about what the people close to me think. And when I write, I mean, I still do that, right? Like, I'm not worried about what somebody from other websites going to say about me or the person I'm writing about. I mean, I get DMs and emails from journalists and bloggers all the time saying, like, you're vile. I mean, how dare you say that? I mean, you know what you're saying, what the cause is. I mean, I just don't care about that because there's only a few people in my life whose opinion of me actually matters. So I've just always wanted to tell the truth that I thought to be the truth. I'm never really worried about making friends. I didn't join this industry to make friends. I mean, I have real friends. I mean, they're truck drivers and they lay tile and they're carpenters. So they don't even care about what I do. They think what I do is foolish. So to me, I've always separated my personal life from my professional life. And a lot of people in this business don't do that. They mush them together, and I think that's a big mistake because that compromises your ability to say exactly what you believe.
Yes.
In the case.
Yeah, and I think that's part of access journalism, sports or politics. I will be the first to admit, I've never been inside either of those quote unquote industries. And I wear that as a badge of honor because it gives me the independence to say what I truly think or believe, not worrying about burning or protecting a particular relationship or continued transactional access. I actually find most of that today, that's a commodity. Oh, you've got some inside information. What's unique about you is how you see the world and whether or not that adds value to others. One thing you said I disagree with, and I think I have some experience to say is, not everybody in media is actually from LA or the coast, but what they do, Bobby, is they might be from places like you or me, but what they end up doing is they don't like where they came from. I like where I came from a lot, and I'm sure you do as well. So they get as quickly as they can to LA or New York or the nearest big city and adopt urban social mores and points of views, to your point, to fit in. So they become undistinguishable from the person that was born and raised in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? They want to be that person. They wish they were a Brooklynite, even though they're from Springfield, Missouri. And so that creates this homogeneity like you're talking about where everybody, and I love what you said about, I also don't think it's true. Like, I don't know if this is an Andrew Tate saying, I feel like it's almost like just a internet meme. Don't worry about the haters, bro. And I don't care what people think of me. But the truth is we do care about what people think of us. The key is to care about the people that you respect and not everyone else. And I think that was really wise what you said, like, I don't know, come with the 5 people you most respect, 10 people you most respect, and value their opinion. But for the rest, don't let them shape who you are.
Yeah, and I mean, because people will reach out to me, people that used to like me and don't like me now, and one of their criticisms always is that, hey, this person, why would you criticize them? Or, hey, me, why would you not paint me in a lighter brush? And I find that so fascinating. It actually just happened about 4 months ago. I don't know if your listeners know who he is, but Ariel Helwani, who's like the lead UFC reporter, he took great offense that I would criticize him because he and I were previously cool and we exchanged friendly texts from time to time. And his criticism was, this guy knows me and he's being mean to me. Well, isn't that what a journalist is supposed to do? Just because somebody was friendly to you does not mean that you're now immune from criticism. But that's always the critique I get, is that, hey, this guy is supposedly friendly with me and now he's criticizing me. I've never really understood connecting those two things. I think the problem with journalism is that people don't do that, right? Like, just because somebody sent you a nice DM, now you just refuse to criticize them. I mean,
Right.
that really embodies the state of media coverage. I mean, you see it all the time, whether it be with ESPN or CNN or Fox News. People don't want to criticize the people who are nice to them, so you get this distorted coverage of people because it's so relationship based. I never wanted to do that. I mean, I can separate the two things. There's a lot of people who I do like personally, who I think professionally have said a lot of bizarre things, and I think their careers have been, in my opinion, disappointing because they're not all that authentic. I have no problem separating the two, and a lot of people don't like that about me.
So that's one of the things that stood out to you. So to continue to tell the audience a little bit more about you, you worked at The Big Lead for a while, which was a sports blog, sort of inside media coverage website. You've now moved on to Clay Travis's OutKick, which has been bought by Fox. One of the things that stood out to me early on was exactly what we're talking about. Not around, we're talking to it directly, but was your independence. And so what was interesting is you were really the only one. And it would be easy for a detractor to say, only one what, Will? Only conservative? And my answer to that would be no, just the only independent guy looking to cover the media. Here's what I mean by independent. As you said, everybody's looking to fit in. Everybody's looking to be friends with one another. Everyone's looking to say the right things to be popular. So the vast majority of sort of inside media coverage, and okay, we can put specificities on this. Outside of maybe you and Ryan Glass-Steagall, almost everybody else at The Big Lead, Richard Deist, who at one point in time was a big deal, no longer. I think a lot of people that write for other outlets as well that cover sports media, specifically right now we'll talk about sports media.
Yeah.
They praised individuals in our business who seem to have no objective metrics or reasons to be praised. And then it became like a marker. It became a thing to do. And then everyone did it. Like, oh, this person is the next big thing. This person is great. This show is wonderful. They're all saying the same thing about the same people in the same shows. And Bobby, you and I both know it, at least in the short term, made a lot of people millions of dollars. So that lack of independence created a fake market that reinforced the executives' minds inside of ESPN. Oh, look at all these sports websites say that Katie Nolan's a huge deal, when there's no ratings or anything to back up that. And then contracts flow for a little while until reality comes back. You were the only one trying to actually independently see reality.
Yeah, so this is actually a fascinating conversation, and I'll even get more in detail. So when I first started covering, let's just talk about early on, sports media, there was this unwritten rule that there was only about 5 to 6 people you could criticize without like an editor having to make sure it doesn't offend somebody, and that was Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith, Colin Cowherd, Dave Portnoy, Jason Whitlock, Clay Travis, and you, Will. Like, those 7 people, if you had an opinion on them, feel free to criticize them, to bash them. But my thing was, there were so many more people to cover because everybody was criticizing you and Clay and Whitlock and Skip. What about the people who were elevating by failing up, including Katie Nolan, Bomani Jones, Dan Lepetard? These people got contract after contract, promotion after promotion, and they kept on failing. So why were those people off limits? Well, I didn't play by those rules. If Bomani Jones got a new show and it was failing, I was going to say it. If Katie Nolan got a new show and nobody was watching and it was setting record lows, I was going to say it. and I did say it. And that's why so many people didn't like me and would tweet about me, would call me, have their agent call me, because they would say, why is this personal? This is racist. This is sexist. And my argument was always, why? Am I not covering these people the same way they cover athletes? The same way the media reporters they're friendly with are covering Clay and Will and Whitlock? I never understood why. I guess I did understand why, but I hated this idea that you could only criticize a handful of people. That is the exact reason why people don't have any trust in the media today. Now, this was just early in my career when I just covered sports media. It's on a much larger scale now. I mean, there's so many people who you're just not allowed to criticize. But that has been the foundation of my career, is that nobody is off limits and nobody should be off limits to praise. I mean, just as much hate that I got for criticizing those individuals, I would get for saying, you're right here, hey, Will Cain's radio show is up 30-40% from the previous show before him. And people would say, well, why are you giving credit to a white guy? You mean his ratings are only up because he's racist? Don't you know that he's only appealing to grieving white sports fans? And I said, no.
Is that a real conversation you would have had with an editor?
Oh yeah, or agents and talent and stuff. Absolutely. I remember when ESPN canceled High Noon. This was Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre's show, and I just laid out the facts of this is why it didn't work. And the editor said, "Is this really necessary?" And I said, "Yeah, it's necessary. Look at all the writers who talked about how great this show was and how it was going to be the next PTI. When you get that praised, you obviously should be subject to criticism when you fail." So those were some of the tug of wars that I had often. It was a good reason. I came to OutKick. I mean, the big league did want to keep me, and I was somewhat happy there, but I just wanted to go somewhere where I was less reliant on these people. And so that's big step.
I've never heard about some of those behind the scenes conversations. It makes me want to be less charitable.
Yeah.
The thing is, like even you talking about some of your coverage, I've had this thing, like, back to your point, Bobby, I know some of those people. And the truth is, I like some of those people. And there are some others, and I can't think off the top of my head anybody you particularly named that I don't particularly care for. But it makes it hard when you know somebody and like somebody to actually, speak ill of someone. But the truth can't always be seen as ill. And so I guess, I would want, if you went after me, Bobby, if it were grounded in truth and I didn't think it was an ad hominem attack, meaning just subjectively, I'm going to try to hurt Will as a person, I'd like to think, and I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm some stoic that can't be penetrated. I'd like to think I would understand and could take it. Like, I'll be real with everyone. Okay, this is a dance and this is a mix. So when you're in the media, what happens is this part of the business is actually fewer and far between, but there is people who look for talent. What that means is vision. They have some idea that says, oh, this person is really good at X, Y, and Z, and I think they would stand out, right? And you have to respect executives' subjective ability to identify talent outside of quantitative metrics, right? Because an AI machine could look at ratings or anything like that and pick the right lineup. But that only tell you about the past. It won't tell you about the future. So you understand that executives need to look. And so a lot of the people you just named do have talent. I would readily admit that. They have talent and intellect. But there's a difference between that. And then, by the way, there are other factors that also influence decision-making. Like, do we need to make sure our network looks like X or looks like Y? Do we have too many white guys? That all goes into it. That's being real. But you also have to show up in at some point, you do have to show up in quantitative metrics, not just qualitative. You have to have ratings in this business. Yeah. Now, you can always say, well, I didn't have time. And some of that would be true. Like, you and I've had this conversation. Jesse Waters rated. He rated. When Fox was looking to put a new 7 p.m. show together, and there was a bunch of people, including me, that were doing rotations in a week, Jesse stood out. He quantitatively showed that he is a success. Yeah. And for example, the weeks that I did, it didn't. I mean, there are some underlying metrics that I would love to believe show a real vision of the future in the demographic. But look, I would say my case wasn't made through that metric. My case rested on qualitative. Every other show I've ever been on, the Will Cain radio show, First Take, Fox and Friends, there have been quantitative metrics to say, oh, it actually translates.
Right.
So my point is, I forgive some executive decisions, and I think a lot of those people you referenced are talented, and I think I understand vision and why you do certain casting at times, but at some point, you do have to face truth, and it has to show up for the business.
Yeah, and so I think I want to be clear here. So a big part of my career and coverage is I've always responded to narratives in messaging because one of the reasons I got into this business was I find the messaging so dishonest and so deceiving. So when people say, why are you criticizing this person? Well, usually it's because the messaging around them being promulgated by the rest of the media is not accurate. So one of the reasons, I mean, I don't criticize you, it's not because I know you, it's because the messaging around you is not that, oh, this guy is like, no one's saying that what they said about Katie Nolan and Bomani, that these guys are the next faces of sports media. It's been the reverse. People have diminished you. So I've been the one to say, actually, no, if you look at Will's ratings, he's actually far bigger than what you're saying. So a lot of my reactions are responding to the messaging out there, which most of the time is not accurate. I mean, when you left ESPN, there was a lot of people saying, oh, this is because Will's radio show didn't work. And I pointed to a press release a couple of months before of ESPN actually admitting the show was up, I don't know, 60%. So it's not that I'm targeting
Press release from ESPN.
From ESPN. Yeah. So it's not that I'm coming after Bomani because I don't like him or I stuck out for Joe Rogan because I like his show. A lot of it is debunking the messaging out there.
Yeah, and I'm not interested, for the record. I mean, like, I don't even want to. Like, I have always had a friendly relationship with Bomani behind the scenes, so I'm not even talking about him specifically at times in this. I've just always appreciated your willingness to try to actually see and say what is happening in the media. What do you think about today, Bobby? Like, what do you think macro is going on? Like, ESPN just had a ton of layoffs. Front-facing layoffs, big names in some cases, Max Kellerman, Jalen Rose, and the media in general, not just sports media, but particularly sports media right now, is having a lot of trouble. At the same time, one would like to believe, oh, it's all moving digital. I feel very important. I feel like my digital career, what we are doing right here, is very important to my career for a whole host of reasons. But digital hasn't really replaced as a success story traditional media. Everyone wants to pretend like it has, but I don't believe it has. Not yet. So like, what do you think is happening? Do you think in 5 years, everybody like me is going to be on YouTube or fractured up digital streaming platforms, or what's happening in the future of media?
Yeah, so let's go back 15 years ago or 20 years ago. The idea in media was people are going to watch a certain channel or listen to a radio lineup. So you put people there and you make them a star. People would watch ESPN all day, CNN all day. They'd listen to their local iHeart affiliate, their local Westwood One affiliate. Media is now so fragmented, people come and go. So you can't just put somebody on at noon and expect them to be a star, put them on at 5 o'clock. They have to actually resonate with the audience. So what's happening is the middle class is being pushed out. The upper class of people in media, Joe Rogan's, Dave Portnoy's, go on and on, Alex Cooper, Stephen A. Smith, they're bigger and making more money than ever before, and they're going to continue to. But what you don't have is that successful middle class that you long had in media. Digitally, yeah, the gap between traditional media and digital media is going to continue to shorten. Will it ever truly replace it? I don't know, but here's what I think is an important point to make. Mass reach does not mean influence. Joe Rogan is considered the most influential person in media. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. Will, people might be surprised to know this. Jake Tapper reaches far more people than Joe Rogan. Even if Joe Rogan reaches the millions of people on Spotify they say he do, that is total reach. when Jake Tapper averages 600,000 viewers, that's concurrence. That's average viewer per minute, meaning over the course of the hour, he's reaching far more people. So
Yes.
Jake Tapper has a bigger audience than Joe Rogan.
Can we
but
just
Joe
pause right there for just one moment, Bobby? Because that's another truth that you're telling that so few people actually not just fail to tell, actually fail to understand. And I'm a huge. This goes back to like the previous criticism or reality that you reported when it comes to some personalities at ESPN. It has nothing to do with who you like or who you enjoy. I'm a huge fan of Rogan, so this is not.
Yeah.
And I'm not a huge fan of Tapper. So this is not to say like as a backdoor into who I like. It's just to paint an accurate picture of reality. People don't understand that television ratings are I even forget. Is it 15-minute increments, the concurrence, or is it even smaller? It's 15, I think.
Yeah, it's quarter by quarter.
Quarter by quarter. So when you hear 600,000 or whatever it may be, that's 600,000 in a 15-minute averaged over, right? Averaged over the hour in 15-minute increments. But that audience could turn over several times within the hour.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it does. We have the stats on that. So by the time you end up at the end of an hour of Tapper, that audience probably turns over. My guess would be 3 times. And so, because you'd probably guess the average viewer watches somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. So, what you're looking at the end, if he's doing 600,000, is 1.8 million unique eyeballs in the course of an hour. So that's total. When we see the stats on any digital, a YouTube video, whatever it may be, that's one set of eyeballs they count. And that eyeball could have watched for, I don't know what YouTube's metrics are. I don't know what Spotify's metrics are. It could be 10 seconds. It could be 30 seconds. But it's just, we're not comparing apples to apples when we try to do this Rogan reach versus television reach.
Yeah, and to show, I mean, how I'm not picking favorites. I too am a fan of Rogan. I am not a fan of Joy Reid, but I would reckon Joy Reid reaches more people on MSNBC because of that turnover rate, and it might even be higher than what we talked about. Like Rush Limbaugh, last I heard when he was doing his show, the average listener listened for like 12 minutes and 20 seconds over the course of a 3-hour radio show. So you break that down. I mean, he was reaching so many people over the course of 3 hours. But
right.
I mean, the bigger picture here is while people in legacy media reach more people, the person that they're reaching is usually not as engaged on average. Like everybody listening to Rogan had to seek out Rogan. They had to click on Spotify, find the episode, listen to it. Well, people who are listening to Joy Reid, while it's a lot of people, they might just have the MSNBC on in the background. They might have MSNBC on while they're making dinner, having dinner on the phone. They're not necessarily engaged with it. So I think mass numbers can be a little bit overrated in this day and age, because I think it will be better at this point to have 400,000 passionate podcast listeners who you can monetize than 2 million, or let's just say 1.5 million, say CNN viewers or MSNBC viewers at this point. So I think that we get a little bit blinded to mass reach. It's really about your influence and engagement over your consumers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, that's also the reality. So that's a compliment back to the side of Rogan. TV is traditionally a passive viewership relationship, meaning people like sit there and let television wash over them, especially live television, as opposed to maybe a Netflix show where you choose to hit on demand and engage with it. But even that's less engaged than a podcast, which I think, as far as media is concerned, is the highest level engagement. And advertising reflects that. You pay more for a podcast than you do for most other types of. And this also, by the way, this brings up what's going on YouTube and Twitter. But let's set aside podcast. Because one of the things I think is interesting, Bobby, is people don't understand. Also, we're talking about Twitter videos a lot these days, right? And the millions of views they rack up. But literally nobody knows what that means. Does that mean you scrolled past it? Does that mean you stopped and watched? You know how on Twitter you have to hit the video for it to open up to the sound to start? Did you accidentally or did you intentionally hit that? How long? No one, like that million could be total like, and I'm not casting criticism at Twitter.
Right.
It's just we don't know what language they're speaking. It's a different language. And look, all ratings can be argued are BS. Like Nielsen, what is Nielsen? I mean, that's also, honestly, it's BS as well. I've never met anybody with an Arbitron rating in their car, never, for radio. Now, I've never met anybody with a Nielsen box, never in my life, for TV. And then they take small data and they extrapolate. So it's BS too. But the point is, at least everybody's speaking the same language of BS. I don't even know what language we're talking about when we talk about Twitter. I don't know what a view means.
You're absolutely right. And based on what I've read, it actually is every time you scroll past a Twitter video, you get counted. So it's not accurate at all. But the way to make money in media is and this goes back to radio, is that it's those affiliate advertising deals where you do an ad read for, say, 1-800-Flowers, and then you say use promo code whatever. In this case, we'll say Will Cain. Well, if you can drive people using that promo to 1-800-Flowers, you can make a ton of money. Someone I trust told me this when I was in Los Angeles in March. The reason Call Her Daddy, the show, does so well is that the host has those deals where she talks about a product and then says, if you want 20% off, use promo code Alex Cooper. Well, they can directly see how many users she's driving to a product. So her mass reach, which is massive, doesn't even matter. It matters how many people she's driving to a product, which is why sports gambling is so important and so lucrative, because like we'll use Pat McAfee, for example, and I don't know how much Pat McAfee's worth. I actually don't think he's worth what people say he's getting paid. But what we do know is when the sports books legalized in Indianapolis, he drove users to sign up for the product. In a little inside baseball here, when I first joined OutKick and it was privately owned, the sports book legalized in Tennessee. Well, we had a deal with FanDuel at the time because Clay, who was based in Tennessee, was driving people to sign up for FanDuel using his promos, like to bet on the Titans or bet on the Volunteers. Well, at that point, Clay's reach doesn't even matter. It's about how many people he's getting to engage in the products with which he's advertising. So that's how I see the future of media heading, not mass reach. How many users can you engage with the products with which you're advertising?
So I love this conversation, and I recognize for the audience, like, this is inside baseball. Why do I care? But actually, I'm going to bring it. I'm not going to try to falsely do so. I'm going to authentically, I believe, say why it kind of does matter to anybody, whether or not you're in or out of media. But before I do, one more question on this.
Yeah.
I've been curious, if there's a bubble in media specifically around gambling, because we saw these huge deals come out, Le Batard, McAfee, others, huge deals. And like break the market type style deals.
Oh, yeah.
And you wonder, is that sustainable? And you brought up Call Her Daddy, like Alex Cooper got a huge deal from Spotify. And I did wonder, and I still do wonder to some present tense way, is that sustainable or is that a bubble? But what you're telling me, at least in the case of Alex Cooper, is it doesn't look bubble-ish because there's actual transactional returns that justify, because she has a huge deal with Spotify. I don't remember what it is, but I'm gonna 25 million.
I guess 60 million over 3 years, so about 20 million a year.
Wow.
So yeah.
So you're telling me is, at least in that case,
Yeah.
there's real value to the advertiser and to Spotify. But in other cases, maybe there is a bit of a bubble.
Yeah, I think that's important to distinguish here. Like her value and the other ones you mentioned, like Le Batard and McAfee, to me are totally different. She's worth it, and I think her deal is up in a year from now. She's actually worth more than $20 million based on the market. I think she'll get it. The other ones, there might be a bubble because what's happening with, I actually won't say McAfee because he actually proved to drive signups. A lot of people's contracts are based on projection, how much that the gambling company thinks they'll make, where in her case, it was what she actually was making. So I think, is there a bubble? Yes, but I think some of the highest paid people, be it her or Rogan, those to me are less about projection than what they've already proven.
So now here's why I think it matters to the average listener or audience who's not interested in inside baseball media. If what you're saying is true, and the future of media is smaller, more influential personalities having relationships with listeners or viewers through some platform, whatever it may be, podcast, YouTube, whatever it may be, what I find heartening about that is this. In a business that is designed for mass, what happens is you end up with people who say things that will appeal to the masses. So I'll never forget this at ESPN. And by the way, back to that thing, but because I don't think that, I hope we didn't speak too ill of personalities or people. Just tell the truth. It's a truth that everyone knows. Like I've been there. Like whether or not you want to know it or not, in the hallways, like with the low level producers, everybody knows. Everybody knows, who is real and who's not real when it comes to the success. When you're trying to be real as far as like being a success to the mass audience, your goal is to be liked by everyone and to never say anything quote unquote controversial. And you end up saying the same things that everybody else says. And part of it's human instinct. Like you said, you want to be liked. Part of it's like, I want the biggest audience possible. And so you end up with milquetoast, crap opinions and analysis. And I definitely saw that. I definitely have seen that. If the future is where I, as an example, get to have a relationship with an audience that is truly authentic, and I think this is an authentic conversation we're having right now. Yeah. Like I can tell you, here, I'm going to be authentic with another thing. I rated really good on ESPN Radio. I did not rate well in Los Angeles. It was a huge success for my show to get picked up in Los Angeles. That was a huge success for Afternoon Drive. It didn't rate well in LA because they want local sports talk in LA and not national sports talk in LA. That's me being real and authentic about my successes and failures. If the product of this smaller, more influence-based audience is that you end up with people who are more authentic, this will be a great move for the media. You need people to figure out how to be real. And I mean, I love that idea. If I have a small audience, and I believe it doesn't matter if it's big. Right. Just maximize it to the people that want to connect with my authentic point of view and relationship with them.
Well, you're right, but here's the problem, and it goes back to what I was saying about 15, 20 years ago. The people who can actually make a lot of money with that small audience is still pretty limited, right?
Yeah.
Because 20 years ago, you just got a 2 p.m. show on MSNBC, and all of a sudden you're a success because people are watching no matter what. There are very few people who can monetize that small, engaged audience because it does have to be at least large enough to sell advertisement for, and you have to be able to drive enough people. So it is better for the content of media. I mean, podcasts quality-wise are better than TV and radio shows for that reason. But the number of podcasts that are actually successful is there's not many that are making the money we just talked about with the big personality.
Oh, so it's that kind of money. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a positive for quality. The question is going to be that middle class we talked about. Can they make podcasts work? As of right now, we haven't really seen it. We haven't really seen a middle class of podcasting. They're out there, but they're not making a lot of money. There's a significant gap between the podcasters who make nothing, who make 150, than the ones who make 750, and the ones who make 10 million. There's a really large gap in each of those increments. So it's better for quality, but as far as star making ability, it is going to be more difficult.
Can I tell you what I think the key on that is?
Yeah.
It's going to be the same revolution that has to happen in the advertising industry. Advertisers that want to hit mass markets won't be the right place and won't and shouldn't pay the same CPMs. So let's say, here's me, okay? There should be you know what? Tacovas should be advertising on my podcast, my digital show. Why? Because I wear cowboy boots and believe in cowboy boots and whatever it may be. The companies that believe in patriotic values or true values that I share should be advertising and paying appropriate CPMs or strike a business partnership deal with me, like the one you were talking about with Alex Cooper.
Yeah.
The point is, it's going to take a revolution in products and advertising, which is a larger thing about America. And like we did this on Fox and Friends this weekend, talking about Tesla, owned by Elon Musk. Tesla signing a document saying they will support socialist values in order to sell cars in China, right? So that's not going to work as a high influence shared value medium. Like to your point of like smaller podcasts. Okay, Tesla's not the right place for that then, right? They're trying to be everything to everybody. But if there is a product who has these values, they need to seek out the content that reflects those values.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really smart point because Subway doesn't have the same value to your show as someone who makes cowboy boots or flannel shirts or other products that you wear
Yeah.
and your audience would engage with, right? So you're right. Advertising has to be more personalized for the content creator, which, by the way, we go back to like Twitter, YouTube. That's actually not happening. Twitter, YouTube have been reliant, and Facebook too. What is it called? Pre-programmed advertisement, where it's
Yeah.
installed there for everybody. I don't believe that's the model. I believe it is back to radio reading ads. Will Cain reading ads for cowboy boots. Your co-host Pete Hegseth doing ad reads for man buns, like stuff like that, right? I don't think it's as much as just any brand. I think it's about brands personal to you.
That would really, really chap his hide. He's really working on a mullet. To have
Yeah.
his alpha mullet be turned into a beta man bun, he would be very
Yeah.
upset.
I gotta say, I hate to judge people by hair, but I don't know. I think he has some explaining to do. Whenever you have those side shots of Pete, kind of wonder what's going on there.
Hey, speaking of these social media platforms, what do you think of Threads? Does Threads represent a threat to Twitter?
No, I don't think so. So I actually was on Sirius XM this week and did a long segment on this. So I call it like the default rule. Americans say, go Google that question, or I don't have the answer, Google it. Well, Google is not an actual verb. It's a fake term that we've normalized because of how custom and normalized Google. Google is the default search engine. So no matter how much better Bing and DuckDuckGo are, Google is the instinctive go-to, just like Netflix and chill. Nobody says let's Paramount and chill or Peacock and chill or
Yeah.
Max and chill. Well, Twitter is the default for what it is, and that is the real-time conversation as a news source. Twitter's not that big overall, but for the media and for information and real-time engagement, Twitter is the default. People say, hey, retweet my column. Hey, retweet my podcast. Well, that's just instinctive, comes off your lips. So I think that's going to keep Twitter afloat. And here's the important thing. Twitter is the home base of the culture war in many ways. It's the trendsetter, the de facto editor of the corporate press. I wrote about this yesterday. It's going to be much harder to continue cancel culture if conservatives and liberals are segregated between Twitter and Threads, right? Like,
Absolutely.
it's going to be a lot harder to go on Threads and say, hey, fire Will Cain if Will Cain's only on Twitter, right? It's going to be a lot harder for people on Twitter to make fun of Rachel Maddow if she's only on Threads.
Can I interject right there? So you and I've talked about this. Cancel culture. It's interesting how you just described that, how Twitter has actually been the town square of cancel culture. For example, you and I both know radio, and our mutual friend Clay Travis has one of the most influential shows in radio.
Yeah.
Along with Buck Sexton. He probably has and definitely could say anything controversial he wants on radio, and it's not going to get him canceled. Like, the odds of it getting him canceled are very low because whatever happens on radio doesn't make its way onto Twitter. And I'll, by extension, say me on Fox and Friends Weekend can say a whole host of things that also probably don't result in cancellation as compared to if I was hosting Fox and Friends Weekday, because it's not covered by the haters that try to get you canceled because they're sleeping in, hungover, or whatever they may be, or getting ready to go to brunch in Brooklyn. Like, this cancel culture is driven by a handful of people whose business is to watch a handful of TV shows and then turn around and try to end your career.
Yeah, so what it is like Media Matters and Mediaite writers and Brian Stelter, Oliver Darcy, they can only watch so much, right? They're not listening to AM radio. They're watching a few select Fox shows. So those are the ones that go viral. It's the same thing with, you mentioned radio. Like, Mark Levin reaches more people than a lot of TV hosts, but he airs at 6 to 9 on AM radio. Bobby Lewis and those other guys from Media Matters, they're not listening to AM radio, so they're not tweeting about it. So Twitter really stirred all this stuff based on what shows the haters are watching. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, people watch Fox primetime just for that reason. These sites actually put people on the clock to watch Fox News primetime and
Right.
write up everything they say and get really angry about it. Well, they're not doing that for other shows, so you can say more controversial things on those shows. Like, yeah, if Brian Stelter's job was to listen to all 3 hours of Clay Travis's show, I'm sure people would be calling for Clay's job tonight.
Which is not a negative. In fact, it's probably a
Yeah.
positive reflection for Clay
Yeah.
Travis. So in the end, you don't believe that Threads represents a real threat, then therefore to Twitter.
No, I really don't. I think, I mean, conservatives tried to do this with Twitter 1.0 for years with Parler, Gab, True Social, Getter. Didn't really work. People want that fight to continue. So breaking it down where liberals go to Threads and conservatives stay on Twitter, I don't think that that's what anybody wants because they want the fight to happen in the town square. So I think in a year from now, Threads will be kind of an afterthought. Now, look, it does have more foundation than like Parler ever did because of Zuckerberg's backing, but I don't consider it much of a threat to Twitter. I think in a lot of ways, I don't know if Twitter's ever going to make the money it should, but as far as relevance, I think Twitter is more relevant today than it has been ever, just because I think it is the one place on the internet where you can broach certain topics, and the left wants to stay on there so they can get mad about it, and conservatives want to be on there because they can actually say it.
Speaking of independent controversial opinions, I have to say I've never tried it, but you're a big Chicago deep dish pizza guy over
Yeah.
New York pizza.
I am. So, and by the way, a lot of people are saying this is my most controversial opinion ever. So, that's pretty good, right? By the way, I put out a tweet about that, and you wouldn't believe how mad people got. I mean, I've talked about everything from the vaccine, the race, the mask, the transgender issues. When it comes to pizza, people really take it seriously. Look, you lived in New York for a long time, so you don't really count, right? Because you're just, indoctrinated into New York pizza. But if you were a neutral arbiter of pizza, Will, you would agree with me that Chicago pizza is superior.
Okay,
But
hold
again,
on. Let me before you nail the coffin shut.
yeah,
Let me
right,
see if I can keep it open. I
yeah,
didn't move to New York as a pizza snob. I grew up like you, small town.
yeah,
Pizza, like I remember when Domino's came to town. First of all, pizza for me, we didn't even have Pizza Hut at first. We
mm,
had little tiny chains, like it was called Mazzio's, and then we got a Pizza Inn. And I remember going to Pizza Inn, and then we got maybe a Pizza Hut, and then when Domino's came, it was big time. And I love Domino's, and I
mhm,
still do. We had Domino's the other night, and I said, I forget how good Domino's is. But then I got to New York, and I did learn what like a good, because another thing is you do when you do Domino's, and the way we probably grew up is
right,
you load it up with toppings, like just ridiculous amount of toppings. New York is a plain cheese pizza. That's what you get, a plain cheese.
yeah,
And at the end of a night at the bar, it is a really good, nice, cheap snack. It's a little greasy for me, but I think I have become a New York. I understand the value of a New York slice. When I see pictures, I've never had it. Chicago deep dish, it looks like you probably do, right? You have to eat it with a fork and knife. And I'm not,
you do.
it looks like lasagna.
Well, that is not true. It's definitely not lasagna, but you do have to eat it with a fork and a knife. I mean, look, maybe again this is geographical because I live in Michigan and Detroit tries to copy Chicago pizza, so like I'm used to like a very poor man's version of it. So when I went to Chicago, it was an upgrade. But they are different. But I will say this: the best thing about a pizza is the sauce. New York pizza neglects the sauce, where Chicago emphasizes the sauce. So if you have a good sauce recipe, I think Chicago has the edge.
I don't know that I've actually never thought it was about the sauce. I mean, the sauce is important.
Yeah.
Um, but I would like my Domino's order would be thin crust. I would want a thin crust pizza from
Okay.
Domino's with a little crunch to it. And you look like you got a big chunk of spongy, soft bread up there in Chicago.
Uh,
Am I
uh,
wrong?
it- I don't know. But it was pretty good. I mean, I have to say, like Dave Portnoy does his pizza rating. The pizza I had in Chicago, and I don't even know what the place was called. I think we have to send him there 'cause I think he would agree that it was pretty superior. And I would want to make one point. You mentioned you not being a New York snob and your Texas background. You're right, but we met in person on your radio set about 6 years ago,
Yeah,
and you had Van shoes on.
I did. Yeah.
So
What is it? What
you
are you saying?
Well, you have to preference yourself that even though you're Texas at heart, your time in New York did change you a little bit,
I'm
right?
wearing Jordans right now.
Okay, so like, you grew up in Sherman, Texas. You would never walk down Sherman, Texas with Vans.
That's okay. So listen, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
But I have because my friends have made fun of me. I think here's what I like, Bobby. Okay, this is my explanation. You can't always wear cowboy boots. Okay, so when I believe in classics, I would like classics that stand the test of time. Vans are a good classic tennis shoe. I think Jordans have arrived at the place of classic. I don't pick up the latest trend. I'm not into the newest. Like, I don't like the on clouds or whatever that the people wear and that kind of thing. I don't want what's newest and best. I want classic. Now, I recognize that's a little Southern California cool with the Vans, but I
Right.
think they look pretty classic. Like Chuck Taylors are classic too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Do you see what I have in my hand here?
Yeah, I see Will Cain show
So,
hat. That
uh,
classic. That's a
yeah,
classic.
yeah. So speaking of that, I forget the exact backstory when they sent me this, but I took issue with you wore like a dress shirt with a hat, and I thought that was kind of some like,
I did.
insult style. So when I got this hat, I actually did the same thing. I wore it out in public, and somebody said, "Hey, I like the combination of the dress shirt and hat." So I have to admit, I was wrong on that, but I wanted to make sure I found this hat for this because there's not a lot of people who have a custom-made Will Cain show hat, and I'm one of them. So it's kind of like when you get an autographed jersey, right? Like not a lot of people have Michael Jordan's autograph. I have a
Oh
Will.
yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, stick to telling the truth. Don't not the compliments. All right, I want to end. I'm going to return to a serious subject, but one I like it for the end. So I was listening to a former colleague of mine the other day talking about, and a friend talking about that he's not that into politics, that he's into ideas. That's how I would describe myself as well. I never
Yeah.
got into this because I cared about the horse race or Washington, D.C. I always got into everything I did because I like ideas and I
Yeah.
like people. I truly like people. That was my favorite thing about being in sports. I loved hanging out with Nuno and Bubba and Cerruti and Pat and Mike A and all my guys on the Will Cain show. And I didn't care about their political beliefs. I liked being guys and busting each other's stones and having fun and talking sports. And I loved it when we disagreed on ideas. And I like
Yeah.
serious ideas and I like fun ideas. I think that the future, I don't know how this ties in, but I somehow feel it is connected. I think that the future of what it is that we're doing here, what I do for a living, is going to be less about left and right, and definitely less about Republican and Democrat.
Right.
I truly believe that the difference and the difference maker in this is going to be between truth and falsehood. And you have a column up about that as well. The hard part is both sides of almost every issue believe they are on the side of the truth. I
Yeah.
think they do. There are
Right.
probably very few who know they're engaging in falsehood and propaganda, but maybe some. Most believe they're on the side of the truth, but we have never been more awash in lies. In my estimation, we've never been more awash in lies. And I think in the future, that influence or that real authentic connection one has with an audience or the media that I will seek out as a consumer, because I consume media as well as
Mhm.
produce media, is going to be about that divide. I don't
Yeah.
care as much if I agree or disagree with you. I care more about whether or not you are lying to me or trying to tell the truth.
Yeah. I mean, what was really interesting to me, and I've thought a lot about this, we are a nation divided. Nobody can dispute that. Well, why are we? We're not divided by left versus right per se, Republican versus Democrat. We're divided between those who seek the truth and those who believe the truths they're told to believe. Every topic that is true of. COVID divided us because you had half the country believing Fauci and the government and the CDC, and you had the other half believing what they're actually seeing. With race, same thing. You have people that know that this anti-racist movement is wrong, but then you have the other half believing Joe Biden saying that white supremacy is the greatest threat to the homeland. Same with the trans issue. You have people who know it's not right to treat gender like a costume that you can take on and off on demand and have men play against women in sports. but you have the other half of the country being told that this is the way of the future, that this is the way to be on the correct side of history. So all these topics we fight about, it's not conservative versus liberal. It's the people who believe what they see and the people who believe what they're supposed to see. And that is what ultimately divides us. I'm actually writing a column this weekend. Hopefully it's out a couple of days after early week about how this whole affirmative action equity movement, it created what I call excused racism, where you can openly discriminate against somebody with the mindset that that is how you reach equality. In what world is that the case? In what world is that acceptable? But people are told over and over again that the only way to reach true equality is for people to atone for people who look like them in their past. I mean, that is completely backwards. It's repugnant, it's racist, and it's demeaning to the entire nation. So the truth is what ultimately divides us. And there's so few people who are actually providing the truth right now. And that's what's so frightening about it is the average person during COVID consumed more media because they were scared. They were seeking information. Well, where were they getting the truth from? Because it wasn't ABC, it wasn't NBC, it wasn't most of cable news, it wasn't podcasts. It was so hard to find the truth. And when somebody actually told the truth, they were kicked off of social media for it. So people need information, but it's so much harder to find factual information, which has really heightened this divide at this point.
I totally agree. I would only add one adjustment. I think people are willing to forgive as long as they feel like you're trying to arrive at the truth. In other words, like you said, tell the truth. Sometimes it's hard to see what is the truth, especially during a pandemic or, a complicated issue over science. But if there's a sense that you're trying to sort through everything to arrive at the truth, I think that's what people are hungry for, an outlet where that is, and where you can find an authentic, honest attempt to arrive at the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go back to this column I'm writing about affirmative action and excused racism. I wanted some actual data to say how is this working. Here's something nobody in the media has mentioned. It's really important. So affirmative action has actually derailed the college success of Black students. Why? Because certain students have been accepted into Harvard and North Carolina where they're not technically qualified to be in, so their dropout rate is much higher than if they were to go to, say, Oakland University, where their grades say they're qualified for. So affirmative action has actually increased the dropout rate among Hispanic and Black students, as well as discouraged them to get master's and doctorate degrees because those who were affirmed in a college struggled along the way. So there's really no proof that affirmative action was better for the country at large. Yet everybody in the press just says this is going to help white people, this is going to hold Black and Latino students back. Well, there's no proof of that. There's no data that says that's the case.
Well, there's a bit of truth. Man, I always enjoy the conversation. You can check him out at OutKick, multiple columns up every week. Bobby Burack. Thank you, Bobby.
Will, appreciate it.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.